Another week, another playoff spoiler. We're back on the Money Stop. He's Cole Cusumano. I'm Steven Cusumano. The Money Stop, your most important NASCAR betting stop of the day, presented by Kickin the Tires and our friends at GridRival. And after Kansas, Cole, I would say it definitely lived up to the hype, and it also lived up to our predictions, and that was Ross Chastain finally winning in 2024. It was only a matter of time, and once again, something that, we predicted 6 of the top 10 here, and I think you look at guys like Ross Chastain, Alex Bowman, Zane Smith, a few that not everyone was talking about, but we were, and I feel really good about the way this week went, coming off another awesome race at Kansas.
Yes, sir. Another Money Stop masterclass. We correctly predicted 6 of the top 10 drivers in this one once again, including the race winner, Ross Chastain, who I actually had personally felt really good about that for that weekend. Great performance by that team, finally getting their first win of the season after what's been a pretty rough go for that team. But as we know, they always turn it on once that 10-race slate for the playoffs rolls around, and they sure did once again, albeit not as a contender for that Bill France Cup. But looking at this top 10 here, had a runner-up from William Byron. 3rd place went to Martin Truex Jr. 4th place, Ryan Blaney, as the only Ford driver in the top 10. So another really good call on our part. Had mentioned that we felt good about the Toyotas, felt good about the Chevrolets, but maybe the Fords, with the exception of somebody like Ryan Blaney, would kind of not really show up, just having, with the bow ties and the Toyotas kind of improving while the Fords have kind of plateaued a bit. So another great call by us. Ty Gibbs rounded out the top 5. And then the back end of the top 10, we named all 5 of these drivers in our episode, beginning with my sleeper, Alex Bowman, your winner pick, Christopher Bell, my winner pick, Denny Hamlin. So for the second straight week, both my winner and sleeper picks made the top 10. And then we had Chase Elliott and Zane Smith, one of our value picks, rounding out the top 10. And want to give a shout out to your sleeper for this win, Steven, and Carson Hocevar, because those Spire Motorsport rookies really impressed me once again. I know he didn't get the top 10 finish, but Carson Hocevar, it was both him and Zane Smith either running top 10 or damn near the top 10 the entire running of this race. Another really impressive showing, another really good call by us, great analysis on our part. And, just goes to show you that you got to stay plugged in to the most important betting stop of the day, because we are on the money, we have been on the money, and we look to keep things rolling here into the biggest unknown of the season, or I guess remaining this season, in Talladega.
Yeah, we were saying with Kansas, there's so many different possible outcomes for this race. And sure enough, as we also mentioned, I think we both said that we thought that the winner would come from our sleepers category, and sure enough, it did. But, you go from that expectation to the expectation at Talladega, which is that not only are there so many different possible outcomes, every driver in the field is a different outcome. So let's get into this here. First of all, for those of you who have not listened to a Money Stop Super Speedway episode, we like to go off the vibes. We're going to bring in definitely some analysis here, but a lot of this is going to also come into play where it's gut feelings. And we're also coming to you a day later because, let's be honest, the odds probably aren't going to move very much between Thursday, Friday, Saturday, because we don't really know what's going to happen until the green flag drops. But we do know that we've had a couple of races at Daytona, we've had Talladega, we've had a couple at Atlanta, so there's a lot to go off of super speedway-wise this year and Talladega-wise over the last several years in the next-gen car. So a lot of outcomes. We've had already a couple spoilers in these playoffs. I think that adds to the drama even more. And you've got some drivers that are hovering around the bubble that maybe you would have thought wouldn't be there by this point in the playoffs. So let's dig into this here. Pre-qualifying odds per bet MGM. You've got the favorite plus 1,000, Ryan Blaney. Joey Logano plus 1,100 right behind him. A slew of Fords, followed by Brad Keselowski plus 1,300. Kyle Busch and Denny Hamlin round out the top 5. They're tied at 4th at plus 1,400. So, Cole, using the term favorites pretty loosely here because I don't know how you could really pick a favorite, but these are certainly the guys that we're going to dig into now. We'll each pick 2 that Vegas sees as the most likely to win this race, and that's why they're favorites.
All right. Before I dig into my personal favorites for this win at Talladega, I want to preface by saying there has been one team by far and away that's been the best on the drafting tracks this season, and that's going to be Team Penske. We saw them fully on display once again in the most recent drafting race at Atlanta to kick off the playoffs in a Penske perfect day. It was Austin Cindric, who led the most laps won a stage, Ryan Blaney, who won a stage and finished third, and then it was Joey Logano, who walked away with the win in that one. So you look at that specific stable as maybe the safest bets for this race. And you also want to take into account, crunching some numbers last night actually, Team Penske has led 35% of all 5 drafting races this season. So I know the number doesn't sound too high, but when you take into account the fluctuations in leaders and comers and goers, that's actually a really dominant and really good number. So Team Penske, look out for them this weekend. And with that in mind, going to kick off my personal favorite for this race win with Ryan Blaney, the odds-on favorite for this race win at plus 1,000. He is the 4th most expensive driver per GridRival's DFS values at $19.2 million. And I want to say on Ryan Blaney, I know that they have not had the most flashy, and they've had a relatively quiet title defense to this point in 2024. But what we have seen from this team in the playoffs has been exemplary, and it shows why they are the reigning champions. Complete championship composer to this point. Ryan Blaney quietly has finished 6th or better in 3 of our 4 playoff races thus far. That includes that 3rd place finish at Atlanta. And I want to hit on that one for a second because I mentioned the championship composure. In this race, while he did finish 3rd, it did not come easily. He actually got involved in a late race wreck in this one and rallied to finish 3rd place with, I think, 75 or so to go. So that took guts, that took a lot of skill to get that effort and that result. And looking back to last week where he finished 4th, another extremely similar effort, obviously. Didn't quite get involved in a wreck, but he had a loose wheel and an unscheduled pit stop late in the running of this one. And there was also a bit of a fuel mileage concern on their part, but they were able to rally and finish top 5 once again. So I think Ryan Blaney and this 12 team are rounding into form at the perfect time. They've been quiet. That's kind of been his MO for a majority of his Cup career, but that's when he gets you. And we're going into arguably his best track on the circuit. It's statistically his best track on the circuit in terms of wins because he is a 3-time winner here, most recently coming in this race last year. And he has also finished top 2 at Talladega in 3 of his last 4 starts. The only outlier being this past spring where he finished 20th. But keeping Talladega in mind, he has the 4th most laps led. However, the 3 drivers ranked ahead of him have 10 more starts than him at this track. He also has the 2nd best average finish among drivers with 10-plus starts at Talladega, as well as the best average finish at 7.2 and most laps led in the next-gen era. So Ryan Blaney is the favorite for obvious reasons, and while stats are relatively obsolete at Talladega, I think you can take a lot of stock into what we've just heard about Ryan Blaney and his resume at Talladega. Feeling great about him, but we always preach to go with your gut on the money stop for drafting tracks like Talladega, and my gut is telling me to go with William Byron. I love William Byron this weekend. He is plus 1,400 for the race win and $17.5 million, which is a great value for DFS. That is the 11th most expensive in the field. And why do I like William Byron this weekend? Well, he's coming off runner-up finish at Kansas, and I really think we're seeing Rudy Bugle and this bunch really get it put together at the perfect time. We've seen it the last couple seasons. This team will start off really hot. They got their 3 wins, and they kind of just fell off. And I don't know if that's them kind of testing things out, trying to prepare for the postseason, but there's always that lull, that summer lull for this team. Inconsistencies mount, but now we're seeing some cohesion, we're seeing some results, and that's trending in the right direction for this team. His next best result in the playoffs, next to Kansas, was actually 9th place at Atlanta, one of our drafting tracks. And he actually was a top 5 car for a majority of this race. I love what I saw from that team in this one. And keep in mind, William Byron opened the season up with a win in the Daytona 500. So he has a win on these style tracks already this season. He has been, I think, very underrated in that aspect on these style tracks. Yeah, he also has the win at Daytona for his first career win in the Cup Series. But you look at Talladega, he's finished 7th or better here in his last 3 starts. That includes 7th place this past spring and a career-best runner-up finish in this race last year. That's not even taking into account that he's finished top 15 in all 5 next-gen starts at Talladega, posting an 8.6 average, which is third best overall in that 5-race sample size. So I think William Byron, I mentioned it there, he's very underrated when we think about our usual favorites going into Talladega and tracks like that. But he has proven time and time again, especially in the last couple years, that he has been one of the best drivers statistically and in terms of wins when coming to tracks like Talladega. So for that, he is my gut check for this weekend for a favorite. I love William Byron. He also has a 34-point buffer as the first-ranked driver in the playoff standings. So I think with that in mind, he might play it a bit conservatively to not lose a chunk of what he has there. But at the same time, I think that it's still a race. You're going out for these wins. And he also has the affordability to kind of get crazy and go all out for this win and lock himself into this next round early. So give me William Byron, give me Ryan Blaney as my two favorites for this weekend for the YellaWood 500.
Yeah, I feel like William Byron is just, I would use the word underrated for him on super speedways because it's gotten to a point where, like you said, the Fords are going to sweep up all the headlines. Vegas thinks so. We think so. I mean, I'm sticking there. I'm going with two Fords out of my favorites, and it's two of the guys I just mentioned that are very highly favored by Vegas. And I'll start with the guy who finished runner-up at Talladega earlier this year, Brad Keselowski. I know it's been one of his tougher stretches of the season over this second leg of the season, I guess you could say, but all of that goes to rest at Talladega. You're talking about a 6-time winner at Talladega in Brad K. 11 top fives out of 31 starts, an average finish just outside the top 15. He's had 15 top 10s here, which is nearly half his starts at Talladega. Just been so good at all the super speedways his entire career, including the next gen era, including 4 RFK in that 6 car. I just love Brad Keselowski. It's a little boom or bust. I mean, you look at the results last year. He had a top 5 in the spring, followed it up by finishing 32nd in the fall, but you're looking at a guy that is going to start up front. He's going to run up front. He's going to have drafting partners. And when I'm looking at favorites, that's what I'm looking at. I want to know which cars are good pushers and which cars are good at being pushed. And the Fords are good at both. And they have a lot of people in that alliance, like you mentioned with Ryan Blaney. I like Brad. I also like Joey Logano, who, again, maybe a name you're not expecting to hear as much, considering he has not finished inside the top 18 at Talladega since this race 3 years ago when he finished third here during the playoffs in 2021. But Joey's a guy that, again, you're in the Penske Alliance. You've got Ryan Blaney. You've got Austin Cindric. You've got all those guys running up front, including the likes of a Chris Buescher, a Brad Keselowski. And there's a reason why he's valued at plus 1,000 by BetMGM this week. It's because he is one of the favorites to win this race, not just for Vegas, but for me as well. I look at the Fords as the most sure bets to win this week for all those reasons. I like your pick of William Byron because it's obviously, it's not outside the box because he's just outside the top 5 in odds. But if you're looking for favorites, you're looking for a high floor, high ceiling, high potential to win this race, while at the same time, high potential to finish in the top 5, top 10. So I'm looking to minimize risk with my favorites by taking Brad Keselowski, who finished second in this race earlier this year, and then Joey Logano, who in his career has won 3 times at Talladega, albeit out of 31 starts. But for Joey, this is a guy that knows how to win the big races. Looking at his positioning in the playoffs right now, he's only 4 points to the good, tied with Chase Elliott for the bubble spot. And I think you're going to come out and see them staying up front because they need to points race, but also trying to win this race because there's a lot out of their control coming into Talladega. So for me, favorites this week, I'm just trying to minimize risk, maximize profit, and I feel really good, honestly, about all 4 of those drivers before we get into our sleepers category here.
Yeah, you nailed it. I mean, it was difficult for me to not pick a Joey Logano or a Brad Keselowski as one of my favorites, given their pedigree and their success at Talladega. And I think what you said about the safety aspect of betting is a huge thing to take into account for this weekend. I mentioned it there with Ryan Blaney as well. Like, stats, again, they're pretty obsolete when taking into account the unpredictability and the chaos of Talladega. But for guys like Joey Logano with 3 wins, for guys like Brad Keselowski with 6 wins at this track and their history overall, like, it's almost a no-brainer to consider them for the win or at least a top 3, top 5 prop bet. Now, I also love what you said about the Fords and their dominance at Talladega and drafting tracks, because it's a perfect segue into my two sleepers I'm about to mention. Sleepers category. These are drivers where you can get the most bang for your buck, usually on a weekly basis, but even more so with the odds doubled for our sleepers compared to our favorites. And here is my caution before I give my sleepers here. We've well documented the Ford's speed and success on these tracks. Chevrolet's very much in almost that exact same vein, but on a bit of a lesser scale. Toyota, however, I think we've seen time and time again, especially in the next gen, that they have struggled quite a bit to compete and keep up with these manufacturers just due to a theme you're going to hear a lot in this episode, strength in numbers. There are not as many Toyota teams in the field, and for that, it's been a bit rough getting on the same page, strategizing, and just being there at the end. Obviously, you're going to have guys up there at the front towards the end, but the path to the front is a bit more difficult given that strength in numbers theme that we're about to mention here. And with that in mind, there are two Toyotas that I like quite a bit as sleepers this weekend, beginning with Bubba Wallace at plus 2,200 for the race win and $18.3 million. That's the ninth most expensive for DFS. And want to start this off by saying, welcome to the world, baby Bubba. Bubba Wallace and his wife just welcomed a new child into the world days ago as a recording. And I think with that in mind, it's going to bring a little bit of some inspiration, some good mojo, good vibes for this team going into this one. Not that he needs any more of it, because he has been touted as one of the best super speedway racers in the business, and he's shown time and time again why that is. I mean, he's one of the best pushers. He's always running up front, and he is a winner previously at Talladega as recently as the fall of 2021. However, there is a volatility associated with this driver, given that his only top 10 and 13 starts here is that win back in that fall of 2021. However, I think the thing about Bubba Wallace is the fact that he finds ways to be in position for this win. Time and time again, doesn't matter if it's Daytona, Talladega, Atlanta, Bubba Wallace is a sure thing to be a factor for this win coming down to the wire. And while the results might not always be there, all you can ask is a chance for a shot at the win at the end, and he has proven that he can do it every single time he's out there. And I think there's also some reason for optimism, given the fact that he has led the fourth most laps at Talladega in the next gen, albeit his best finish being 16th in this current 7th generation car. But there's also optimism because his teammate Tyler Reddick won this race in the spring. So taking into account the fact that he is one of the best super speedway racers in the business, the fact that he has a winner here previously, and the fact that he has top 6 finishes in 3 of 5 drafting races this season, Bubba Wallace is a great pick for the YellaWood 500 win this weekend. The next driver I'm going to mention, you have sung his praises, rightfully so, the last 2-3 weeks, because he has been one of, if not the hottest drivers in the sport at this point in time. However, if you were to mention this name 2, 3, 4 years ago, I would shudder to think about even considering him for a sleeper, because he was pretty abysmal on these style tracks, and that's going to be Christopher Bell at plus 2,500 for the race win, and the most expensive driver for DFS per GridRival at $21.6 million. Christopher Bell has finished 14th or better in every playoff race thus far. That also includes 4 top 5 finishes over his last 6 starts, including 3rd place at Daytona and 4th place at Atlanta. And now why that's important to me is because those are obviously 2 drafting tracks, and because he has drastically improved his craft this season at tracks like Talladega, finishing 4th or better in 3 of 5 drafting races starts. And you look at his Talladega resume, I'm throwing out the window. He only has 1 top 10 and 9 laps led in the next-gen era, albeit with 2 poles, but you look at his resume this year, those 3 finishes of 4th or better, including 2 of those coming in his last 6 starts, speaks volumes to me, in addition to the momentum on his side since the playoffs have began. So I know it's not a guy that we typically think of, or I guess historically think of when going to drafting tracks like Talladega, but you look what he's done this year on these style tracks, you look at what he's done as of late in the Cup Series, and as we know, going back 2 years now, playoffs time is Christopher Bell's time. For those reasons, I love Christopher Bell as a sleeper for this win at plus 2,500. despite the concerns of him racing a Toyota.
I love both those picks. I mean, you hit it right on the head in saying that generally I'm not very high on the Toyotas at Talladega, but if there are two Toyotas I feel really good about this week, it is those two. And like you mentioned, the things that are worthwhile to point out with Christopher Bell, but what sticks out for me is just it comes down to momentum. It comes down to the gut, and I feel like I've said it, like you said, I've been very high on Seabell the last few weeks. I just feel that he's at a turning point in his career where every single week, it doesn't matter what track we're at, they're going to come out and they're going to perform. And that's obviously why they're so far up in the standings. That's why they're contending for race wins every week, no matter if he has good history at the track or not. And I feel the same way this week. I feel that Seabell is going to finish up front because they've just been so consistent, like you said, with the 4 top 5s over the last 6 starts. And then Bubba is just a guy that's done it time and time again at the super speedways, including Talladega. So I love both those picks. I'm going to go a little bit more, I would call Toyotas outside the box. So I'm going to go a little bit more inside the box with my 2 picks, or at least one of them, in Austin Cindric, because Cindric, usually he would be more of a value pick, but this is a guy that we've already mentioned him a few times this episode. He's inside the top 10 in odds per Vegas this week. He's plus 1,800, and there's very good reason for that. The last 2 fall races we've had at Talladega, he's finished in the top 10. Last year he finished 5th. The year before that he finished 9th. That's his only 2 starts in the fall Talladega race as a Cup Series driver. He's finished inside the top 26 every single Cup start at this track. We've seen him perform extremely well at Daytona, including the 500 win a couple years ago. And not to be a broken record, but bears mentioning again, you've got Joey Logano, you've got Brad Keselowski, you've got Ryan Blaney on your side. You've got some great pushers. And I don't know if there's a better pusher in the field than Austin Cindric. And he's been knocking on the door. I feel like he's had so many great runs at super speedways recently where he just hasn't been able to finish the deal. And I look at him as not only a gut call, but someone that I feel really good about at Talladega and any super speedway because of the equipment he's in. And from day one in the Cup Series, he's just had a knack for it. So I've named 3 Fords now. I think for my next sleeper, I'm going to go with a Chevy. You mentioned William Byron before. I just feel like you could even argue this guy's a value, and that is Alex Bowman, because Bowman has just been incredible over these playoffs. I mean, looking at the numbers, coming off a 6th, a 9th. I mean, look at the last super speedway we were at. He finished 5th at Atlanta, respectable 16th at Daytona, and then earlier this year at Talladega, finished 5th. So I think you're looking at a guy that is the perfect storm of he's hot at the right time. I said it the exact words last week that the hottest version of Alex Bowman is one of the best drivers in the garage. So you're getting a guy that's hot, a team that's hot, and Bowman is not a guy you traditionally think of at super speedways, but look at the results this year. Again, he's had great results. He finished runner-up in the Daytona 500. He finished 5th at Talladega. He finished 5th at Atlanta. Like, this is something that's gone so under the radar for Alex Bowman. He has found a knack to finish up front at these super speedways. They've always had speed. I mean, I don't think there's really any team that has more pure speed on the super speedways than Hendrick Motorsports. And you're looking at, not only has he had the 3 top 5s on super speedways this year, well, his teammate, as you mentioned, William Byron, won the Daytona 500. So I think while generally I'm very high on the Fords, if I'm going Chevys, they're going to be Hendrick Chevys. And look no further than Alex Bowman. I think that he is it's shocking to me that he is valued outside the top 15 in odds. He is plus 2,500, which is actually tied for the same price as someone like Christopher Bell, Ty Gibbs, Ross Chastain. I think that's such a great value, and it makes me think of him as a sleeper for the win this week. So I feel fantastic about Alex Bowman and Austin Cindric, and I feel really good about your 2 Toyota picks as well. This is another week where talk about all these possibilities of outcomes. I think that there's no telling what could happen as far as somebody like Alex Bowman punching his ticket into the round of 8 or even a non-playoff driver winning. I think that, we've already seen it happen with Ross Chastain, with Chris Buescher. It's not out of the question that another one like Austin Cindric could win this week. So I feel good about these guys. I know historically for Alex Bowman, he has not had the results at Talladega, but the recent ones have been very good at super speedways, and he's too hot to ignore right now. So I like all 4 of our drivers in this tier.
I mean, I love both your sleeper picks. Kind of in a similar vein to your favorites, actually. I think these are two safer ones compared to mine. Austin Cindric is a winner at Daytona back in 2022. He, again, led the most laps and won a stage at Atlanta previously to open the playoffs. And he's proven time and time again that he has been one of the best pushers and best leaders at these style of tracks. So, I mean, with Team Penske's dominance in mind as well, he is an excellent pick for a sleeper at this one. And then Alex Bowman, I mean, what's left to say? I've had him as my sleeper the last 2-3 weeks. He has been the best playoff driver next to Christopher Bell. And again, like similar to Christopher Bell, actually, he's not somebody you think of typically when you go to tracks like Talladega, but this year he has been almost lights out. The runner-up in the 500, the top fives, the top tens. Until he proves us otherwise, I think he's going to be a mainstay in this section for the remainder of the season. Now, shifting gears here to value picks. This is typically where we highlight drivers you can use as back markers for DFS, drivers you could have a bit more faith relying on that aren't as expensive or notable as our sleepers or favorites. But for a track like Talladega, I mean, we saw it with Harrison Burton back at Daytona to close out the regular season. Anybody can win these races, and I think we have drivers here that are legitimate threats for this win or top tens at a minimum. And I'm going to kick things off here with someone who has been one of the fastest drivers on super speedways in 2024, and that is going to be Todd Gilliland. Todd Gilliland is plus 5,000 for the race win. He is the 23rd most expensive driver for DFS at $13.8 million. He has the fourth best average finish in the next gen at Talladega at 12.8 with 3 top 10s and an 8th place finish back in the spring. So he has been a top 10 car pretty much in his entire next gen career at Talladega, very silently. And I mentioned his speed on these tracks this season. He has started 4th or better in all but one drafting race this year. That is wild to think about. And also keep in mind, he led the most laps at Atlanta this spring. So really impressive numbers for this youngster. And keep in mind, he also has Michael McDowell, one of the best super speedway racers in the business, as his teammate, who was also about a lap away from winning this thing in the spring before he threw that block on Brad Keselowski at the end. But I think that's another reason to love Todd Gilliland this weekend. His stats speak for themselves. The speed has been evident in 2024 at these style tracks. So give me Todd Gilliland as my first value pick for Talladega this weekend. And finally, I'm going to mention one name here that's definitely a gut check. It's somebody that I always think of when we come to Talladega, especially in the fall. And after doing some research, I think those feelings, that intuition was on the money because the numbers, much like Todd Gilliland, speak for themselves, but with an even greater sample size. And that's going to be Eric Jones at plus 6,000 for the race win and only $9.3 million for DFS. And now I know this name is going to sound pretty off-putting, just given his recent stretch and his 2024 campaign as a whole. But Eric Jones, I mean, for anybody, if you're having a bad year, a bad stretch, you go into a track like Talladega, all of that can be erased immediately with a quality day or even a race-winning day. And while he has not won at Talladega in his career, he has won at Daytona in his career. So a very similar track. And I think you look at his resume at this track in Talladega, he's finished 6th here in 3 of 5 next-gen starts, and he has a runner-up back in the fall of 2020. But back to the fall runs that Eric Jones has had. He has an average finish of 10.8 going back to 2020, which is 4 races. In that same 2020 stretch, he has a 15.8 average in the spring. So while it's a 4-race sample size compared to a 5-race sample size in the fall to the spring, it's still a 5-position difference at that from the fall to the spring. And just combining those 9 starts together to give you a better idea of how good he's been or how consistent he's been at Talladega for a very unpredictable track. In those 9 starts going back to 2020, Eric Jones has the 4th best average in the series at 13.6, only to Ryan Blaney, William Byron, and Todd Gilliland, 3 other drivers that I specifically highlighted in this show. And that was actually, I just looked that up before recording this, so that was not knowing that ahead of time. Just, I think, good intuition on my part and maybe a good indicator of things to come for Sunday. I like Eric Jones quite a bit this weekend. Maybe not for the race win. Obviously, you can consider him, but he's a great look for a top 10 prop at plus 160. So give me Todd Gilliland and give me Eric Jones for my value picks this weekend.
Agreed. I like that tier of drivers a lot. And when I look at our value picks this week, there's so many different ways you can go. I want to go based off of a few guys that have had success at super speedways before. They might be a little bit high risk, but I like where their value is at this week. And I'm looking at, again, BetMGM odds right now. I want to give two honorable mentions. I would usually love to mention somebody like Justin Haley, who's plus 4,000, and Corey LaJoie, who's plus 5,000. But I'm not going to list either of them necessarily this week because they just swapped cars, and I know it's a big adjustment, even with the solid performance out of Corey LaJoie in the 51 last week. I'm tempted to hammer something like a top 10 for those kind of odds for Justin Haley and Corey LaJoie, but I just know it's a big adjustment to have that late in the season. But if one or both of them finishes in the top 10, it wouldn't shock me. However, I'm going to go with two guys that have wins at this track, or at least at super speedways. I'll start with one who has a win at this track, and that's Ricky Stenhouse Jr. He finished fourth here in the spring. Obviously, it's the old disclaimer that you have to mention with him at super speedways. It is going to be boom or bust. He is not going to finish 10th. He is not going to finish 15th. He's going to finish in the top 5 or the bottom 5. It's pretty much that simple for Ricky Stenhouse Jr., but he finished fourth here in the spring. He won here back in 2017. He won the 500 last year. He's the perfect blend of somebody that, looking at the value, he's 3,500 plus 3,500 for the race win. So you're looking at somebody that is a longer odds than Chase Briscoe, Alex Bowman, Ross Chastain. So he's just outside the top 20. I like the value for Ricky Stenhouse, keeping in mind the fact that he may not finish the race. But if he does, he might win the race. So that's definitely clear in the back of my mind. Along with my next driver that has not won at Talladega, but has won at Daytona and has won this year, and that is Austin Dillon. May be an outside-the-box pick because he's not finished inside the top 30 the last 3 races at Talladega, but prior to that, he had 4 races in a row where he finished inside the top 13, and going back a step further, 5 races in a row inside the top 13 at Talladega. So Austin Dillon has always been a guy that he's got a little bit of a feel for the super speedways. He has the win under his belt. I know it was obviously a win that was aided by some actions detrimental on the track. However, you go to super speedways, you see that 3 car, you think that Austin Dillon can be a formidable driver. He is the same value as Eric Jones and Todd Gilliland. They're all plus 4,000. Justin Haley as well. Austin Dillon is a guy that, again, for me, this is a gut call because, as I mentioned, at Talladega, 3 straight outside the top 30. To me, that makes me feel like he's due because you're talking about a guy that has 22 starts at Talladega, and he's had the solid finishes before. Like I mentioned, with that stretch right before this abysmal one, Austin Dillon can get it done. He just needs to keep the nose straight like everyone else in the field. And at value of plus 4,000, I'm looking at some guys who could play spoiler. I'm looking at Stenhouse. I'm looking at Austin Dillon. I like your 2 picks as well, but at the end of the day, value picks, they're really gut calls this week, and I just like the values of a couple guys that are plus 3,500 and plus 4,000, considering they have wins at super speedways before. So there's a lot of different directions you could have taken this. You gave the honorable mentions to Corey LaJoie and Justin Haley, but there's a lot of ways this can go. And there are going to be guys we didn't mention that are very long shots that finish in the top 10. It's just the nature of the beast. So we just named 12 drivers for all intents and purposes. We did name a few extras, but we put our stamp of approval on 12 drivers. Let's get it down to 6. Let's pick one from each tier. Cole, kick us off.
Awesome. For my favorite, I'm going to go with William Byron. My sleeper is going to be Christopher Bell, and my value pick is going to be Todd Gilliland.
All right. For my favorite, I will go with Brad Keselowski. I will take Austin Cindric as my sleeper. And for my favorite value pick, I'll go with Ricky Stenhouse Jr. So that should give you a pretty good idea of where our head's at. We'll talk some prop bets now, obviously keeping in mind the fact that, again, if you have not listened to a Super Speedway episode of the Money Stop before, the fact that there's, certain bets maybe you should stay away from here. And I think as far as prop bets go, I'm just going to go out and say, you got to go with your winner pick and just place insurance bets, top threes and top fives. So if you're good on William Byron, if you're high on Ryan Blaney, if you're high on Joey Logano, Brad Keselowski, I just named our 4 favorites, you want your big money bet is going to be an insurance bet. If you're going to put a bet on Brad Keselowski to win, but he loses in a 3-wide finish by 0.02 of a second, then you're going to be really mad at yourself for not hammering a top 3 odds or a top 5. So big money bets, correct me if I'm wrong or if you have anything to add, Cole, but big money bets, what's your prop bets this week? They are insurance bets for your winner, but it's also top 10s. And I think there's definitely some value to be had in top 10s this week.
Yeah, I think you said all that had to be said about the big money bets for this weekend. They're going to be very subjective depending on who your favorites and sleepers are for this weekend. But go with your gut and whoever you like. So, for instance, I like William Byron as a favorite for this win. Just use that top 3 and top 5 prop bet as an insurance policy. Well, William Byron's top 3 prop bet is plus 450. His top 5 prop bet is going to be plus 210. On a weekly basis, unless you're racing at Daytona, Talladega, or Atlanta, the top 3 or the top 5 finisher props are usually under even payout for those favorites in the top 5. But for a track like Talladega, where it's so unpredictable, it's going to be above even money. So, I mean, this year alone, we've seen 2 photo finishes. All 3 of Ryan Blaney's wins at Talladega have been within 0.12 of a second. So, if you only bet the race win and you don't have that insurance policy down and they lose out by thousandths of a second, you're going to be really pissed off. So I think pick your personal favorite and use those top 3, top 5 props as an insurance policy. But just to give you one definitive big money bet, I think the only thing that could be considered a sure thing for a place like Talladega is Ryan Blaney's top 3 prop bet at plus 325 or Ryan Blaney top 5 at plus 150, considering, as I mentioned during my analysis, he's finished top 2 at this track in 3 of his last 4 starts at Talladega. So that one, I mean, there are not many sure things at Talladega, but that is as close as it can possibly get, in my opinion, for a big money bet.
I would agree with that. I mean, those are very solid. I feel like value picks, just pick a who's who of top 10s, and then again, pick your gut, winner, top 3, top 5. That's my best advice for super speedways, and it hasn't failed us yet. It really hasn't. I mean, you're going to have some duds. Like, out of our favorites, I'm sure one of those 4 drivers, would I be shocked if they got caught up in something that was not of their doing and they don't finish top 1, 3, or 5? Sure, but I think generally speaking, if you follow this formula over the long run, or at least depending on how many bets you have out, how many units you have out, it will benefit you. So I think that's sound advice. Let's talk, though, some over-under bets, Cole, which on GridRival, which is, if you're new to the show or haven't listened in a few weeks, our new friends at GridRival have an outstanding platform for motorsports betting, F1, IndyCar, but specifically in this case, NASCAR. They have their version of over-under bets, which are better or worse. So it's a better than 8.5 or 10.5 for certain drivers. And I think it's a little dicey this week, obviously, because we're going to a super speedway. But I think, when we were talking about the favorites before, we mentioned high floor drivers. Who are some guys that have a high probability of finishing the race, a high probability of not getting caught up in something? You're looking at smart drivers to finish better than a certain position. That's my favorite way to look at it. I think you could go on the contrast side of that and say, this is a guy in whoever, Ricky Stenhouse Jr. or Austin Dillon, that usually doesn't finish these races, and you can go worse. I think that is a slippery slope, though, for the reasons I mentioned before, because they very well could go out there and win the race. But I think the safest way to play better or worse bets this week, which you're going to get to, your favorite ones, is by looking at guys with a high floor that have had low DNF rates. They have had high probability of finishing in the top 10, top 15. I think that's where the money is to be made on better or worse bets this week.
Yeah, and again, I think this is going to be very subjective to whoever you think is going to do good in this race. But there are certainly some drivers that I feel good about, and drivers that have proven time and time again that they can get good results on an annual basis at this track. I think the first one that comes to mind is going to be Ryan Blaney. His over-under is 8.5, so Ryan Blaney to finish better than 8th or better. is a good one. I mentioned it during my analysis. He has finished top 2 in 3 of the last 4 races here. 3-time winner. Seems almost like a no-brainer. I also like someone that we did not mention yet in the show, and that's going to be Chase Elliott, better than 11.5. Just somebody who's been very consistent. He's a winner here at this track before. I mentioned that he has the best average finish in the next gen next to Ryan Blaney. So I think that's another really good one to ponder, just taking into account his speedway pedigree and how he's done at this track historically. And then my other 2 gut calls I liked a lot as well. Christopher Bell, better than 13.5. I think that's actually a really good number, considering it's not even a top 10, it's a top 13 finish. I don't see him finishing lower than that, barring a wreck, which is obviously very possible at Talladega. But for all intents and purposes, how I feel about Christopher Bell and how he's done on the tracks like Talladega this year, that seems like a really good number to me. And then I've sung William Byron's praises the entire show. For him to get a top 9 finish as well, I like it a lot. So I like Ryan Blaney with a top 8, Christopher Bell with a top 13, William Byron with the top 9, and Chase Elliott with the top 11 finish. But again, it's going with your gut. I like what you said as well about picking certain drivers who are not typically very well versed on drafting tracks for under bets. Looking at guys like Martin Truex Jr., Kyle Larson, drivers like that. But I also wanted to mention with the 4 drivers I mentioned, they're all obviously in the round of 12. So you could very well see drivers like those 4 play it safe and conservatively and come away with top 15, top 20 finishes that won't hit those props. So it's a bit of a gamble, like anything with obviously betting, and especially at drafting tracks. But those are the 4 that I like the most this weekend.
What about head-to-head parlays? Because I think, again, like prop bets, a little bit hit or miss at super speedways, but there's a way you can make a smart bet on the better or worse. But head-to-heads, I think, are going to be very dicey this week, just because of the amount of unpredictability. And I don't know if there's any that you're feeling really good about, but for me, there honestly isn't.
I don't feel good really about any of them. I would not advocate for head-to-head parlayable matchups when you have these very enticing and great numbered prop bets for finishes and the race winner prop finishes, obviously. The only one that stood out to me, just to give one for you guys to kind of think over, is Chase Elliott to finish better than Ty Gibbs by 2.5 positions. So Chase Elliott better than 3 spots over Ty Gibbs. Again, going back to what I said about the Toyotas, strength in numbers, there's not a whole lot of Toyotas in the field. Ty Gibbs is not somebody I think of when we go to these style tracks, although he did look really good at Atlanta to open the playoffs. And Chase Elliott, again, he's been one of the best in the next gen at Talladega. He's a previous winner here. So that's the only one that I would pick if I had to pick one. But I would not advocate head-to-head parlayable matchups when you have really good prop bets for top 5s, top 10s, and the race winners.
Well, we'd also like to put our stamp on a daily fantasy lineup, which, again, is met with the weekly sentence that you don't want to lock anything until you know the starting positions. And as of the recording this, we don't know them. But based purely off of values, we like to give you some idea of drivers that we like entering the week. And listen, this is Talladega. This means that you could basically pick any 6 drivers you want because, again, the values are going to be so all over the place that there's a lot of different directions you could take this. But let's dissect a DFS lineup here on again, you can do it on DraftKings, but we're doing this on GridRival with a lot of different capabilities for this platform. But why don't you roll through this DFS lineup that we collaborated on?
Yeah, I'm going to keep it really simple here. So I mentioned it during that analysis just now with the head-to-head parlayable matchups. There is strength in numbers at drafting tracks like Talladega. And for that, I have 3 pairs of teammates in this lineup. I've got Ryan Blaney at $19.2 million and his teammate Joey Logano at $16.7 million. Ryan Blaney, and Joey Logano actually, both 3-time winners here. Ryan Blaney won the most recent fall race here, and they've been by far and away 2 of the best drivers on these style of tracks in 2024. I went with Alex Bowman, one of your sleepers, and William Byron, one of my favorites. Alex Bowman is $18.7 million. William Byron is $17.5 million. Again, I think I like Chase Elliott a lot as well, but his value is pretty steep compared to those 2. So I like having those 2 drivers in there as, a little bit of compensation, but I like those 2 equally as much as Chase Elliott, maybe even a little bit more. And then I'm going to round this thing out with the 2 FRM Fords in Todd Gilliland at $13.28 million and Michael McDowell at $12.9 million. I know we didn't discuss Michael McDowell a whole lot in this episode, but he is one of the best racers at Talladega and Daytona and Atlanta. He was actually like a turn away from winning this race before he threw that egregious block on Brad Keselowski in the spring. So he's always a great pick for tracks like Talladega. The FRM Fords have been really, really fast on the drafting tracks this year. Michael McDowell, I believe he has 3 poles and 4 front row starts on those style of tracks in 2024. So speed's been there. They're both great on these style of tracks. And for that, I like this lineup a lot, pairing up these drivers and these teammates. So I have Ryan Blaney, Alex Bowman, William Byron, Joey Logano, Todd Gilliland, Michael McDowell.
Yeah, that's excellent. I think that, again, minimizes risk. You're looking at guys that have a high floor there, and again, see where they're qualified, but I think there's a lot to like about that. So let's end this. Let's drop the Jack Cole by putting our money where our mouth is. That's what we do at the end of every Money Stop episode. We'll pick our favorites. We'll pick our sleepers, our values, but at the end of the day, we also like to put our stamp of approval on a driver that we think is going to win the race, and a sleeper that is outside the top 15 in odds that we think can win the race as well. So we've had a few winners this week. You had one actually a couple weeks ago in Kyle Larson, but I picked first last week. I went with Seabell, who had himself, like you said, a very strong run. It was really your sleeper that stole the show last week, and Alex Bowman, who finished just outside the top 5. But as I went first this week, we like to jump back and forth. So you have first pick this week at Talladega.
Awesome. Yeah, this one, I showed my cards pretty early. I have a great gut feeling about William Byron. I think, he opened the season up with the win in the Daytona 500, and I think he's going to end this run of super speedways in 2024 with a win at Talladega.
Love it. I mean, you just got, at the end of the day, you have to go with your gut. It might change before Sunday, but for me right now, it is Joey Logano. And I think that, you talk about drivers that have a knack for this time of year, drivers and teams that have a knack for Talladega. I said everything that needed to be said before. Right now, my gut is going to be Joey Logano, and, he's won in the playoffs. He's going to win again in the playoffs. I think he's going to, despite not being the dominant driver all year, he is going to be there at the end because that's what this team does. That's what they know how to do. So for my sleeper, I'll go with Alex Bowman. Why not? I mean, he hasn't failed us yet. This is the 3rd straight week where one of us has picked Alex Bowman, and it's because for some reason he's been outside the top 15 in odds every single week. And I don't know why, but again, 3 top 5s at super speedways this year, hottest driver in the sport, riding high, needs points, needs a win. Give me Alex Bowman for a great sleeper this week.
Nice. I'll go with Todd Gilliland. I feel good about that team and that driver going into this one. Again, mentioned FRM's speed on these style of tracks. He has, again, one of the best averages in the next gen, which is really surprising and very, I don't think a lot of people are picking up on that, but I definitely feel good about Todd and that 38 team for Talladega this weekend.
Well, this is always good stuff. I mean, Talladega, always good, but in the playoffs, literally doesn't get any better than this. So you've got a really great race ahead. Looking again once more at the playoffs, you've got some drivers back there in the standings that are going to need to have good results, even the likes of Kyle Larson. I mean, we didn't mention Kyle Larson once this episode, but there is a lot that can happen. There's a lot that can go right. There's a lot that can go wrong, and this is quite simply one of the most entertaining events in all of sports every year. And as you said before, it might be the best race of the entire year to bet on because there's so much money to be made and lost. But I think if you're listening to the Money Stop, it's more so money to be made. So we'll drop the jack as any good Money Stop would usually end. Thank you all so much for tuning in and tailing us. Hopefully you've been able to make some big bucks the last couple of weeks with our advice because it's definitely been working based on the results, whether it's been prop bets, race finishers, you name it. But it's been great stuff. We will drop the jack. As always, follow us on social media at @the_money_stop on both X/Twitter, Instagram. We've got the paint schemes up always, and also Facebook. We've got a nice following as well. So for Cole, I'm Steven. It's the YellaWood 500. It is Sunday at 2:05 Eastern Time. We're excited. We know you are too. And we will see you next week as the playoffs roll on.